I got great news. So I'm pen pals with Stipe's wife. She's very responsive. We text, I get updates, I find out what's going on. But she's been hard to reach lately. And so I didn't know how to interpret that. I quit. Hey, how's he doing? Give me an update. What are we looking at? When's he looking to return? I stopped doing that. I just kind of elected myself mayor of Get the Hintville, but I just got some Stipe news. And I love it. Stipe, his own words, says he's going to come back against Francis again, but be 250 pounds. And he said, I was around 240. I ended up at 230, but that was on accident. That was just from training. And so he wants to come back and do it again at 250. And I bring that to you because if we're going to do something and expect a different result, something has to be different. We can't do the same thing over and over again and think that something's going to change. To get something different, you have to do something different. And I'm in. I'm in. I mean, I really do think that that's interesting for Stipe to say. And he said why he was going to get to 250. He said, because Francis is big. He's a big guy. I had problems with that strength and size. I could feel it. Now, I don't totally remember that. I know that they had one wrestling exchange. I know that they got locked up and Francis looked pretty good in it. I remember thinking that was a real positive for Stipe at the time that it happened. I remember thinking this is a positive. More you can get this big guy wrestling, the better. Stipe didn't go back to it. And in fairness, maybe it's because he didn't have time. It ended up being kind of a short night, but he still felt something. Whether I saw it or you saw it, he felt it. And his takeaway was simply, I need to put on size. Now, don't forget Stipe at 250. Let's go back to that number. That's 20 pounds bigger, right? Don't forget, Stipe wasn't 240 for this. Stipe was 240 when he became the champion. Stipe dropped down 232, 230.6 one time, 230 pounds. Stipe at 250, a true 250, let's just imagine a true 250, and he's not going to have a lot of fat on the bone. He just can't, right? He just works too hard. He trains too hard. If he is able to reconfigure his body, change his physiology with as much as he works out, it's going to be hard to do. Putting on 20 pounds of muscle, that's a really hard thing to do. But if he does it, it's going to require extreme discipline, but this is a man of discipline. It's going to require extreme dedication, but this is a man of dedication. It's very interesting. 250 pound Stipe, I never loved it when he was 230. If you guys will recall that, he beats Daniel Cormier. He weighs 240. I apologize. He loses to Daniel Cormier, but he weighed in at 240. When he beat Verdum, by example, he's 240. He comes in for part 2 against Cormier. He gets on the scale. He's 230.6 pounds. People are tearing up their ticket. People that bet on him. The line instantly moved. You want to talk about a picture's worth 1,000 words? When we saw that Stipe Miocic took off 10 pounds, it was terrible. Now, he goes out. We all had it wrong. He not only beats Daniel, he stops Daniel. He not only stops Daniel, he outworked Daniel. So that 10 pounds of which you might think is weakness because he was lean to start with, turned out, transferred right into cardio. It was one of these things. He could go harder longer. It was one of these things, but we didn't know. We had to see it. So I bring that to you because a lot has been made of Stipe's weight, even if we guessed wrong, even if we went in the wrong direction. 250 the right way, that's a very different fight. And Stipe versus Ngannou, that size was so glaringly obvious. And I mean, I could remember 2 weeks before that fight happened, Izzy Adesanya comes in second at 205 pounds. But there was a meaningful size difference. Adesanya versus Blachowicz had a meaningful size difference. So it was no sweat off the champ's chin. Nobody looked down on him. Nobody judged him. He just moved up a little higher than he could go, and he went 25 minutes. Right, but you remember the story. Nothing bad happened to Izzy. However, 2 weeks later, the same thing, only with a greater difference, happens to Stipe. We're trying to brush him out. And we're brushing him out because, well, that's heavyweight. There's a bigger gap. Well, it's the same story. We're talking about pounds. We're talking about a meaningful advantage went to Blachowicz. A meaningful advantage went to Ngannou. Izzy gets a pass and Stipe gets pushed into retirement, right? It just wasn't fair. It was weird. The whole thing was strange, and I couldn't believe how many pundits let it go. Couldn't believe how many people let this slide. Now we're hearing from the principal himself. Stipe is coming out and saying, yeah, man, I had a size problem, but I'm going to fix it. I'm not going to get to 260. I'm not going to get to 265. I'm not going to get to what he weighs. I'm not even going to take advantage of the full weight class ramifications. I am going to put on 20 pounds of muscle. Now, that's really interesting, right? That's going to be some hard work. He's going to have to do it. But Stipe's made a lot of claims that to many of us seem crazy, and he's gone out and done them. So I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt. And are you guys with me? That is a meaningfully different fight. You know, that wrestling exchange in that second fight that didn't work out for Stipe, that took a little energy out of Ngannou, that one I referenced. That's different if you're talking about 20 pounds of muscle different. In the striking realm, it always favors a smaller guy. There's a reason Muhammad Ali was 198 pounds in his prime. There's a reason that Mike Tyson was 220 pounds in their prime. When you're striking, now you're dealing with endurance, and you're also predominantly dealing with speed, which goes to the lighter guy. It's not true in wrestling. That's where the size starts to matter. So when you talk about MMA, which has a little bit of both, those grappling exchanges are going to go to the bigger guy. And if you were to look at Stipe versus Francis in that one grappling exchange, you're going to score that. If you understand wrestling, you're going to score that 0-0. The real score was advantage Francis because they both come out of it. There's no positional change, but one of them is now more tired. That was Stipe. Because even though he was doing the same thing, he's having to do it against a greater weight, right? I mean, I feel as though I'm telling you things that are very obvious, but you might not know. Might not know until you see it, so allow me to condescend. But it's true. And 20 pounds not only is likely to change that wrestling exchange, but it would most certainly draw back on the energy storage that Stipe had to put out. You go out and you go into a wrestling contest, even with the guy who's the same size, and I'm talking about MMA, but you get into a wrestling exchange. The wrestler must succeed with the takedown, the positional advantage, but then he must hold him there for a couple of seconds. He's got to get a couple of deep breaths. In wrestling practice, we'll do something called a takedown drill. Wrestling live, hard wrestling, shake hands, takedowns only. You take him down, you let him back up, and we start over. You would never do takedown. You might even see that in collegiate wrestling. You might see a guy in the NCAA tournament, take a guy down, let him go. Try to take him down again, let him go again. You might see that. You would never, ever, 0 times have you ever or will you ever see that in MMA. You will never take a guy down and then let him go in MMA. Not only would that not make any kind of sense, but I'm sharing with you the energy that it takes out. There's a lot of things that will be different on Stipe if he got to 250. I'm making a big deal about that wrestling exchange, but that wrestling exchange was a big deal. When Stipe came out of that, he was a different guy. Even if only by a couple of degrees, he was a different guy. Took a lot out of him. It's not going to do that at 250, not to mention the ability to take a punch, not to mention the power on your own punches. Now, Stipe is going to need to practice this. Stipe is going to get tired a little bit faster. And his speed is going to change a little bit. He needs to work those kinks out in the room. I trust that he will. But if Stipe Miocic is about to dig in at this point in his life, change his physiology, up himself 20 pounds, I can't tell you guys how hard that is. I've had to lose weight in my life, but one time I had to gain weight. One time. Gaining weight was as hard and as trying mentally and physically as losing weight. I remember it very clearly. I used to have to get up earlier to have an extra meal. I used to have to stay up extra late to get extra calories in. There's something called Ensure. It's kind of like a protein drink with some vitamins. I used to have those Ensures and pound. I had them in my locker at school. I would drink them between. I'm telling you, the dedication, not to mention the uncomfortableness of always being full while trying to train. It's a lot. It's an undertaking by Stipe. And if anybody could do it, it would be Stipe. And that does make the fight a lot more interesting. I think you guys agree. And don't forget, when we're talking about Stipe changing, we're talking about Stipe and Francis, you could insert a few different opponents there. Stipe versus Derek Lewis is probably going to happen. Stipe versus John Jones is a massive fight right now. They could make that fight right now. And John's in a position where John's going to need to remind people. Very soon, John is going to need to remind you how good he is. And we're hearing from his coaches, talking about John Jones's, how different he is, how different he is in training with this new size, that his conditioning's held up, but his power is up. Oh, wait until you see him. Sure. That can only take you so far that we are going to need to see it. We're going to see it with our own eyes. And I don't think this narrative that John Jones needs to come around and he needs to do this fight for X, Y, and Z reward, and it has to be a title, and it has to be against Francis. I don't think we should lock into that. I think that we need to show John a little bit of respect, a little bit of appreciation, which is it can be for a championship. It can be against Francis. It doesn't have to be. And I think it would be very interesting if we started thinking in those regards, because that's where all of a sudden we start opening doors to a Stipe versus John Jones, just by example. But there's a lot of really good matches. I feel that maybe with John, we're asking the wrong questions.